Until now, India's strategic focus has remained on Pakistan. After all, why wouldn't we keep an eye out on the country that has time and again sponsored terror activities within the Indian border and has also maintained a lot of people within India on their payroll? Do you remember this and this and this and finally this?
Suspected spy pigeon from Pakistan has now been captured along the international border in Kathua.
But over the years, India has persisted and prevented many terror attacks from happening within India. And we have built our strategic capabilities in such a good manner that we have surpassed that of Pakistan's comfortably on different parameters. But nevertheless, Pakistan's sole existence is based on its opposition to the existence of idea and the idea of India. Now, the general consensus among India's political and military leadership today is this, and this isn't new. Ever since India faced a very humiliating defeat in the hands of the Chinese in the 1962 war, there were many people who have actively warned the Indian government of the dangers that we face from a rising China's expansionist policy. India today is building a lot of partnerships, strategic ones with the Western nations. But way back in the 1960s, parties such as the Swatantra Party had already warned Prime Minister Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru of their distrust of communism. They further went on to criticize India's non alignment policy. They even advocated for better relations with the West and even foresaw the possibility of a two front war with Pakistan and China. And these Iron Brothers have stopped at nothing. Their objective is to contain India's growth and make us look inwards as opposed to looking outwards. As far as the Chinese intelligence services CIS is concerned, they have been actively working in India as many intelligence and media reports have pointed out in the past. From employing their thousand grains of sand strategy to gather intelligence from India using civilian assets, China has been carrying out what is known as ISR activities or operations, which is intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance activities, as far as India is concerned. This, aided with their military intelligence, also known as multiple professional systems, has a rather symbiotic approach towards intelligence operations in India. From surveillance submarines to ships in the Indian Ocean region to even spy balloons in Tibetan plateau, the Chinese have a diverse range of technologies and methods that they employ to gather intelligence in India, and this has been happening for a while now. And this also has external linkages with Pakistan and Nepal and a few other neighboring states, also being treated as a tertiary territory for intelligence gathering and possibly increasing their tentacles into the Indian affairs. What has China done since 1947? If I have to give you a small historical uh, overview of their intelligence activities in India, I would begin by citing an example of a recent story that was broken by the Indian Express, where a data firm based out of Shenzhen called Zenua Data had been keeping a track of more than 10,000 individuals from India across different fields, from the Prime Minister's office to the lowest ranks of the bureaucracy who were in influential positions. And this just scared and rang the alarm bells in the India's administrative structure. So, in this manner, the Chinese have actually developed a robust intelligence gathering mechanism that spies on governments, organizations, and even individuals who possibly threaten their interest. The rise of China has spiraled the news for the use for such intelligence gathering mechanisms across the world, and India, unfortunately, has become one of the targets for it. And this history can be actually traced back to the founding days of the Chinese Communist Party, or the CCP. Until his death in 1976, Zhou Enlai was actively involved in intelligence operations as a part of the Red Army's Special Services Section. Anybody who questioned the CCP or challenged the leadership of the CCP were persecuted very actively, and I don't think it's any different right now. A few years later, Deng Xiaoping arrived on the scene when he took over as the head of China. There was a complete overhaul of the Chinese bureaucracy, particularly the intelligence system, and this is where things actually changed. As the premier intelligence agencies, there are two agencies which China was particularly using. One was the Ministry of Security Services, which was MSS, and the PLA, People's Liberation Army's General Staff Department's Second Bureau, or shortly known as 2PLA, became the go to option for the Chinese. And it is important to note that the Chinese first activated their intelligence system way back in the 1950s when the Tibetan issue came up, and that became a headache for them. The intention of the Chinese government at that point of time was very clear as far as India and Tibet was concerned. Uproot the establishment led by His Holiness the Dalai Lama in Tibet and strengthen China's position in both ways, politically and militarily in Tibet. To this end, the Chinese intelligence did as much as they could to support the CCP and to give a helping hand to the PLA in achieving that particular objective at that point in time. One of the first signs of victory was seen when the Dalai Lama actually agreed to sign the 17-point agreement in 1951. And a highway which was connecting Lhasa and Xinjiang was secretively carried out in the early 1950s. Today it is known as National Highway 219, that also passes through the occupied territory of Aksai Chin. In India, intelligence agencies, especially the IB, had been giving several warnings to the leadership, to the government of India when Prime Minister Nehru was in power. But the government ignored all of these red flags early on. In November 1959, something really happened which was acknowledged many years later. A casualty occurred during a physical confrontation with the Chinese. In Ladakh, there is a region called Konkala Hot Springs, where Karam Singh, who was the Deputy Central Intelligence Officer for the Intelligence Bureau, was killed. And this became some sort of a turning point. And especially around that time in 1959, the Dalai Lama fled Tibet to India with over 80,000 of his followers. And this became a major source of concern for the Chinese intelligence, since the attention of the world press and the world governments had turned on China and towards the settlements, towards the Tibetan settlements in India. As a result, there have been many reports of the Chinese intelligence recruiting ethnic Tibetans to actually infiltrate into India, mostly through Nepal, to establish surveillance on the activities of the Dalai Lama. And this has been happening over the last 60, 70 odd years. Now, this was proved in the case of the arrest of Pema Sering. He was a former PLA combatant who was arrested from Dharamshala in 2013. He successfully infiltrated into India illegally and even obtained a voter ID card way back in 2011. Through the diplomatic staff that is present in New Delhi, the Chinese have been able to maintain a legal cover for many of their intelligence operations that they carry out on the Indian soil. And over the years, the Chinese intelligence realized that India is struggling with the insurgency in the northeast, and this became their go-to option, and this became some sort of a advantage for them to challenge India's strategic autonomy. These groups were given adequate training, weapons, and even financial support from time to time. And on the lines of the Cultural Revolution that took place in China, a group of 300 Naga insurgents, spearheaded by Isaac Wu and Muiwa, reached Yunnan province in China to receive training from the Chinese in 1966. The Chinese have been doing that with many other insurgent groups, not just limited to some of these Naga groups, but also other Northeast insurgent groups and left-wing extremists in India. And this has been happening for a very long time now. Now, coming to the present day scenario, one may even ask, okay, what are the Chinese intelligence operations in India as of today? Now, as compared to the use of human spies, like we may have seen in the Bond movies, human intelligence or human is not as frequently used as before, naturally because technologies have developed and there are other means of warfare and intelligence gathering apart from sending human spies. It is there, but it is there in a limited capacity, and China now uses the Clausewitzian means of warfare or war through other means. Using cyber technology, for instance, they have been attempting to keep themselves updated on India's missile technologies, IT prowess, space programs, and development of nuclear weapons very actively. So the CIS poses more threat since it has been reportedly engaged in deceiving the decision making abilities of the opponents, exhibiting very offensive counterintelligence mechanisms and damaging the technical capabilities. Now, time and again, media reports have emerged that indicate a very strong presence of the Chinese espionage system in India. And many of these spies who are caught red handed in India, their linkage directly traces back to China, and this has happened on multiple occasions. If I have to quote you one or two examples of it, one was when a Chinese national called Luo Sang was arrested by the Indian police on the charges of espionage. Interestingly, he had been arrested earlier on the same charges in 2018, but a court let him go. They gave him a bail. What he had been doing is that he had established a very active Hawala scheme and was successfully laundering money from India, or to India for that matter. The CBDT, Central Board of Direct Taxes, had mentioned that Sang was actually using nearly 10 bank accounts that maintained the finances for operations worth over 300 crores in reality, using fake Chinese companies as cover. On a daily basis, almost 3 crores worth transactions was being laundered with the assistance of a few employees at Indian banks that he managed to tap into. The discovery also later revealed that he was not just using a few bank accounts but over 40 bank accounts, and the entire saga was valued at 1,000 crore rupees. And to establish his cover and an identity, what Sang did was he married a woman from the northeast, and he was also hoping to acquire a Indian passport. But Sang originally hails from Lhasa in Tibet. Luo Sang had maintained an active spy ring in India that started in the mountains of McLeodganj, which is the headquarters of the central Tibetan administration, to all the way down south in Karnataka, where there are Tibetan settlements like the one in Bailakuppe. So there was an active spy ring at work. Second example is that of a freelance journalist called Rajiv Sharma who was arrested in Delhi a few months or years back. Now, he was arrested by the Delhi police on the charges of spying for the Chinese Communist Party. Interestingly, this person who claims to be a journalist had written for several foreign affairs magazines and very notable publications, and the Chinese got in touch with him using LinkedIn. The intelligence services are known to use their state owned mechanisms and state owned media houses to get in touch with people and people and institutions which may be helpful for them in intelligence gathering. Coincidentally, Sharma wrote op-eds for the Global Times. Countries like China, what they do is they consciously send their nationals, who may be journalists or academics or researchers, to foreign countries, sometimes knowing that they deal with sensitive matters. And even if you don't get your hands on confidential matters, you can pick up tips here and there, and you can connect the dots and later use that for intelligence gathering mechanism that you have as an overarching strategy. But the difference in the case of Rajiv Sharma, who was arrested by the Delhi police, is that he passed on classified information and they possess the evidence for the same. Such incidents have taken place over the years, with the CCP and CIS identifying various verticals to access such crucial information from think tanks, ministries, universities, you name it. And one more active threat that not just India but many countries in the world faces is from Chinese institutions which are established abroad, namely the Confucius Institutes. Now, this has become a major concern for all the governments around the world, including India. It is now mandatory for Indian universities to obtain prior permission before signing any MOU with any country that shares a land border with India. All of the activities of the Confucius Institutes are being reviewed in India, including the MOUs signed between educational institutes in India and China. And some of the programs that are offered by the Confucius Institutes are directly funded by the Office of the Chinese Language Council International, which have clear ties with the United Front Work Department, which is directly headed by Xi Jinping. There are about 380 Confucius Institutes around the world in over 180 countries. And imagine the intelligence apparatus that the Chinese have maintained. And many of these institutes are used for intelligence gathering in those countries. Interestingly, this was all mentioned way back in 2013 by none other than Mr. Ajit Doval, who is today India's national security advisor. But unfortunately, very few people pick up on it apart from a few strategic scholars here and there, and maybe the Ministry of Defense, and it is not known in public knowledge. And moreover, since India has been facing these border skirmishes with China at the Galwan Valley, there is a very strong anti China sentiment today within the country. Several verticals of India's security are now being reviewed. And this also includes the incident when India banned 59 Chinese apps, including TikTok, which, according to the Indian government, is a threat to sovereignty of India and poses security challenges. And this has been happening over the past few years recently. In fact, a few weeks ago, there was an isolated incident, a power outage in Mumbai, which was flagged as a possible attempt by the Chinese backed hackers. In another event, a Chinese reconnaissance fleet had been caught red handed while conducting surveillance directly on India on different occasions, and one of the occasions was even during the Malabar trilateral exercises in 2018. And this has been a repetitive occurrence, especially in the areas of the Andaman Islands between 2013 and 2019. And this has been going on for a very long time now. The Chinese Navy have used their naval fleet to actively spy on India's Navy's activities surrounding the neighborhood. And this is done in the form of deployment of submarines, spy planes, underwater drones that aim to gather intelligence about India's activities. In Tibet, there have been reports of usage of spy balloons by the PLA to spy on India, especially in the aftermath of the border skirmishes with India. With China, many cyber attacks on sensitive facilities have been reported. It is said that nearly one third of all the cyber attacks can be traced back to China, and that is the extent to which the Chinese intelligence gathering mechanism is activated in India. So, naturally, one may ask, what is India doing about all of this? But fortunately or unfortunately, we've had to face a lot of strategic battles like one in Kargil and on many other occasions. And even if India did face a lot of difficulty in terms of a positive outcome from these strategic challenges, the good thing is India has been reforming itself from time to time. And since the reforms proposed by the Kargil Review Committee, India has risen as a technology hub. Take, for example, Bengaluru, Pune, Hyderabad, which have become the Silicon Valleys of the country. To improve intelligence coordination efforts in India, institutions like the NATGRID, National Intelligence Grid, have been established. A master database has also been created for counter-terrorism purposes in the aftermath of the 26/11 attacks in Mumbai. On the surveillance at sea front, India has been working with some of the most powerful navies in the world to create a counter force that can match China's in the Indian Ocean region. The initiation of Quad can be an example for this. This is an example in that direction. Having realized China's ambition and expansionism, especially in the Asia Pacific region, United States, countries like Japan, Australia have come together to strengthen their presence in the region, with India being at the forefront. Border surveillance and security is being strengthened as well, and India has to also face the external linkages threats that may be in the neighborhood, where some of the countries like Myanmar, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan may be used as safe havens by many of these insurgents and terror groups to cause damage to India. Now, if India and the neighborhood are safe from being safe havens to these insurgent groups, that lifts off a huge amount of pressure from our security agencies and intelligence agencies. Similarly, it is very important that India has to protect its critical infrastructure, whether it's electricity grids or nuclear power plants or civil aviations or railways, from being attacked using cyber attacks from China. And simultaneously, a lot of counterintelligence efforts, border infrastructure is being also developed by India to counter the Chinese expansionism. Now, interestingly, in terms of the Chinese assessment of the threat perception that they face, India is ranked either in the third or the fourth position after Japan, Taiwan, and the United States. Despite all of this, unfortunately, we are yet to match up to the Chinese capabilities on many verticals. As India grows stronger economically and militarily, the Chinese intrusion of our ways into governance will see a sharp increase naturally, because they would want to monitor what is happening in India as a means of intelligence gathering mechanism. Developing our counterintelligence capabilities from this point seems to be very, very imperative and a need of the hour. Do let us know what you thought about this explainer video. Please subscribe to Swarajya. This is your host, Sharan Sethi, signing off.